of my favorite kind of books to read is stories of South Africans telling their own stories, really, because I think we're a nation of amazing people with a lot of stories that haven't been heard for all sorts of reasons. And one of those stories, and a story that didn't ever think it would find the light, is the story of a little South African girl who was killed, but unfortunately for everyone concerned, came back because her story wouldn't stay dead and she wouldn't stay dead. And she became Sara-Jayne King, author of the remarkable Killing Karoline. And I got to talk to her this week. So, Sara-Jayne, it's such a great pleasure and privilege to meet you. Can I call you SJ?
You can.
Well, I read your book, Killing Karoline, recently, and I was completely blown away. I had to have a chance to talk to you and let South Africans know about the story that you told.
Thank you so much.
I was deeply affected by it and deeply moved by it, but also not only by the story itself. I mean, it's a very personal story and a very moving story, but also I think about its importance and relevance to all South Africans to read this book, and I'm passionate about that kind of thing because of our political and historical chaotic past, we have a lot to resolve in terms of what is our identity. So that's why I think it's such a valuable book. But your identity issue starts very personally. It doesn't even really start about being a South African. Can you tell us, for those who haven't read the book yet, a little bit about what is the story that you tell us?
So the title of this, obviously, of the book is Killing Karoline, and Karoline is me. I was born in Joburg in 1980. My biological mother is a white British woman who had come to South Africa to live with her then boyfriend, who was a South African guy. They met in the UK, they were studying there, and they came back here. She'd never been to South Africa. And while they were living and working in Joburg at the Balalaika Hotel, there she met my biological father, a black guy. I don't know a great deal of information about him, other than he was the head chef at the Balalaika Hotel, and she was head housekeeper, and they got involved in what at the time would have been an illegal relationship, an illegal affair. So she became pregnant with me, but obviously it was still officially with her white South African boyfriend. They hastily got married because she was pregnant, and then 9 months later, I appeared.
Right.
And obviously for those 9 months, she wasn't sure whose child I was.
Her boyfriend thought it was him?
100%. 100%. And married her on the basis of that being the case. And for 3 weeks looked after me as his own child. Apparently, at those first 3 weeks, it wasn't immediately clear that I was a black child or that I wasn't his child. But then it became obvious, and she was forced to tell him the truth about what had happened. And a plan had to be arranged, or something had to come up with why they would need to take me out of the country. The plan was to go and have me adopted in the UK, which they did. But they needed a reason. They needed to explain to their friends and family why we're taking baby Karoline, who to everyone else was still the daughter of my biological mother's husband.
It's like they had to get you out before you went even darker.
Yeah, I mean, really, literally that. And so they concocted this story that I had a very rare kidney disease, which really exists. The disease exists. I just didn't have it, which causes the skin to go darker. It's like a very severe form of jaundice. So that was explaining the darker skin. And before, at the age of 7 weeks, before, as you say, before I got any darker, before my black South Africanism came out, I was shipped away to the UK and adopted there. And when they returned, my biological mother and her husband, they told everyone Karoline died overseas.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
And so you adopted a different family, a different name, all of those kind of... You didn't know about Karoline?
I knew about Karoline, but I didn't really understand. I always knew I was adopted, and not for the reason that most people say, well, of course you did, because your adoptive parents were white. That's not why I knew. I knew because they told me I was adopted. To me, mom and dad were just mom and dad, and my brother was my brother, and that was how it was. But yeah, different name, Sara-Jayne. Sara-Jayne Kirk, as I was then. And yeah.
You mentioned your brother, who was also adopted by your folks, and was also a black child. And it seems that, at least in your early childhood, gradually you realize he's like the only other black person you know.
Absolutely.
So was that itself an identity crisis?
Massively. And I write this in the book, you know, all of my friends were pretty little white girls with swingy blonde hair and long swishy hair, and they could put it in barrettes and ponytails and all that sort of thing. And then, so that was when I was really young. And then as I got older and I started discovering makeup, there was never any makeup that would go on my skin. You know, going shopping with my girlfriends, and they would be trying out this new hairstyle or this new shampoo or this new conditioner, which had absolutely no effect on my hair whatsoever. I didn't know what I was doing with my hair. I lived in the whitest area of England. I think that's what it's officially called. The whitest area of England.
Would you say then, did you experience racism because of that at all? I mean, or was it just your own crisis?
No, for sure. And, you know, racism is a very a difficult term. And for me, it wasn't just the racism in terms of that very overt racism, as in you are black and therefore less than.
Right.
It was a lot of ignorance, a lot of microaggressions, those microaggressions, which I still experience to this day, but that I understand now. As a child, I didn't so much understand. I didn't understand when people would talk about, well, you're different because you're not like the rest of them. I didn't know who them was, which obviously I do now.
Right. I mean, some of that, I guess, is also an inadvertent form of racism that you mentioned that comes from someone adopting a black child, not understanding.
No clue.
And then beginning to perpetuate certain things without even knowing that they're doing it.
I think, and the problem with that is, and you know, it's this thing that, and we hear a lot about this these days, this colour blindness. In my opinion, colour blindness has no place in South Africa. It can't. It has no place anywhere. And it's often used by people as an excuse for not wanting to understand. And also as a cloak for racism.
It's a cloak for whitewashing, is a more honest word than colourblind.
Yeah, for sure. And unbeknowingly, I think that's what my parents did. To them, you know, and their message was, "But darlings, we don't care what colour you are. You're our children." And that actually is a really negative message when you're raising black children.
Because it tells them they're different straight away.
Absolutely.
And potentially lesser.
Yeah.
It's like saying you should be lesser, but not to us.
But not to us. Yeah. Absolutely. And also that this side of you doesn't matter. But the rest of the world was constantly telling me it did matter.
The other thing, apart from the racial side that you become aware of quite early because of that, is adoption itself. You know, I certainly got from reading your book that you had great parents, and you know that they had adopted kids that they gave all their love to, like any kids. But you begin to become aware of the difference between being an actual member of the family and not. I am a victim of the cultural belief system that says, oh, you know, adoption is such a good thing for children who would never have a home and for people who would never have children, and trying to imagine what it's like. And we always looking for, as long as they told you and they were nice to you, then it must have been a great experience.
Absolutely.
And then reading your book, I felt for the first time in my whole life that I heard what an adoptee was saying. I heard what it felt like. And that strange kind of alienation. Especially when no one is overtly intending it.
Yeah.
And you said something which I think really, it was so pointed. It sums up the whole thing for me. And you said, adoption is a very bitter, very white pill designed to kill 3 unfortunate birds with 1 stone. And I thought, actually, that's the bottom line. That really sums up exactly what it is. And by understanding that, people need to understand that we need to dig deeper. We can't just say, oh, adoptees are fine because they've been taken care of.
No.
But you've actually got to realize 3 problems are at the heart of that.
Adoption always starts with pain.
Always starts with pain. And perhaps that's why, no matter how well integrated as a member of that family an adoptee is, they're eventually going to have an identity crisis of some kind.
Yeah. It's interesting because in writing this book, I've had a lot of adoptive families and people who are involved in the adoption triad say, so it sounds like you're very anti-adoption, And it's not that I'm anti-adoption, it's that I'm not looking at the root of this pain.
Right.
Because, it's the whitewashing, it's the covering up, it's the shaking off, putting a new name on and bringing up as your own. And that's fine. It's one thing to love your child as if it came from your own body. It's another thing to ignore that it didn't.
Right. I, of course, as a South African, am interested as, did you start becoming aware, because of your connection to the land of apartheid, any kind of, the issue that arose out of, actually, and I come from South Africa, that place, was there any of that?
Yeah, there was. And I think, as you said, and people often remark on this in the book, in that kind of the alienation that I experienced was twofold. It was the adoption, then it was the race thing. But I thought, and I don't think I've even ever kind of acknowledged this before, I thought that all people who were adopted, even though this wasn't my brother's story, and so intellectually I knew this wasn't the case, but I thought all adoptees came from South Africa and had one black parent and one white parent. I didn't think white kids could be adopted, for sure, like that. I remember there was a family that lived in the village in which I grew up, and after having known them for years, I discovered that the brother and sister were adopted and they were white, and I could not get my head around it. I just thought, but why? Surely it's only black kids, because there's something wrong with us. There's something bad here that means that we've created a problem, and therefore we're the ones that need to be adopted, which is really interesting. I don't think I've ever even kind of connected that before. But yeah, I think the identity thing, or the othering that comes as a result of adoption. It was fed, for me, it was fed by the fact of I come from South Africa, particularly as I got older and I understood what that meant.
Right.
The fact that I was the abomination of a creation, this creation of the mixing of races, which was a bad thing.
Because it certainly seems that as you got older, your sense of alienation or identity crisis increased.
For sure.
Because you started, developing problems around it, basically.
Yeah. I knew nothing about South Africa, nothing at all. Right. And that was very alienating, particularly when I came back to live here.
Well, it seems like increasingly you were pulled to come here. I mean, I know you spent time in Dubai. You were beginning to look for yourself and rebel and run away and do all those things. But one of the things that did seem to more emerge when you were here were the problems that led to addiction or being in recovery, having to go into a recovery program. So those really seemed to surface once you were in South Africa. Something that you did say that also I found quite affecting, and I wanted to ask you if you still think this, but because obviously it was more and more you were keeping things inside and you weren't showing what you really were feeling. And you said at the time that you lost your dog, you said that taught you to never tell anyone when you felt sad, scared or lonely. I felt very sad when I read that. And I wondered if your process has taken you further than that, or is that still true?
No, I mean, it's had to take me further than that, or I wouldn't say that I'm in recovery, which I am, for 10 years now. I mean, the whole process of me going to rehab, and I think a lot of people, when we talk about rehab, unless you've been, you have no idea
Right.
what the reality is. And I think a lot of
Sure.
people imagine that you turn up and you're off your head on drugs or whatever the case is, and then
And they fix you.
Yeah, and then 8 weeks later you leave and you're fixed, and that's what it is. And you don't take drugs anymore, or you don't starve yourself anymore, or you don't gamble anymore, or you don't have compulsive sex with people anymore. That's not what rehab is. Rehab is, for me, rehab was taking me out of society before I did any more harm to myself or to others, but primarily to get to the root of why. Because I didn't take drugs because I loved taking drugs. I didn't not eat or eat compulsively because I loved food or hated food. I did all of these things because of this hole in the soul that we talk about in recovery, and more so tying in with the adoption, the primal wound, this feeling of inherently, I cannot possibly be good enough. If my own biological mother can give me to strangers and walk away, whatever the circumstances, whether you've had a relationship in South Africa and it's illegal or whatever, something must be inherently wrong with me that this person could hand me over, turn around and walk away and get on a plane and say my baby died. So in dealing with those issues in rehab, it's imperative that I now, these days, am able to say, this is where I'm feeling I need to say this. Otherwise, I'll start using drugs again. I'll start, doing all of those dangerous behaviours again. It's all about, and the book really is all about being one's most authentic self and the truth will set you free.
Exactly, not hiding it.
Absolutely.
That is what's so powerful, and that's why I wanted to ask you about that statement. But one of the things that you did do, and which was a manifestation in your case of the process, was self-cutting, self-harm. And a lot of people don't understand that. Can you explain what drives someone to harm themselves that way, to cut themselves?
Yeah, and for me, the first time that I started cutting was, I think I was 13. And it was a compulsion. It was the compulsion, and it wasn't the compulsion to hurt myself. And I think there's so many myths surrounding self-harm, and I think it's really important that we talk about it, particularly as we're going into Mental Health Awareness Month. Cutting for me was about release. Cutting for me was just another escape. It was like unscrewing a valve and letting some of the air out, but the air was that toxic air that was killing me, and I didn't have the tools at that point to deal with the feelings that I was having in a healthier way. So for me, it was the release that I felt when I cut. It was like a weight coming off my shoulder. It was just another form of addiction. It was another way of changing the way that I felt, to stop feeling how I felt in that moment and to feel another way. And also almost a kind of, can I feel? Am I capable of feeling? So to cut myself and to see the blood on my arm and the scars on my arm, it almost was a validation of me as a person. You are real. Even though it may feel like you are not living in the real world, you still, when you cut, your blood runs red. Right. And I'm quite graphic in the book about the cutting, and it was important for me to do that. Also to process for myself, to process what the cutting was about and the self-harm was about. And a lot of people would say, well, it's, if you're cutting, you're trying to kill yourself. Well, no, I tried to kill myself, and it wasn't by cutting. And also, this attention-seeking thing. So that couldn't have been further from the truth. And as you said, a lot of my cutting was done in a dark room, sort of sitting down in a corner, in a very dark, hidden, isolated space.
Does it have anything to do with physical pain is more manageable and identifiable than emotional pain?
Absolutely. But the interesting thing is, when I cut in that compulsive way, there was no pain. And that's something I've never really been able to explain. And there have been times when my reaction as somebody who cuts has been to cut, and it's hurt, and I've thought, why is it? Why? And I tell you why. It's because I'm getting better.
I was going to say, because I'm just speculating, but perhaps why there was no pain is because the emotional pain was still greater.
Absolutely.
And you just couldn't still get through to that physical
That was it,
pain.
exactly. Yeah.
And so, as you say,
So there comes a point when it stops working. Like all addictions, you need to do more or it just stops working.
Yeah. There's a lot more in your story, which I want people to read the book, so I'm not going to reveal. But I have to say, for me, it felt like I was reading a novel. I kept on. I knew it was a true story, but I kept on having to remind myself that it happened this way, even though it looks, because in the true way of a novel, it's a great story, and just like a really good novel. You just pages before the end, and it hasn't yet resolved. And you think, but please, and I know you're here. I'm going to be interviewing you next week. Surely this is going to end up okay. So it became very unpredictable after a while. Because it's incredible, because then you detail your in being back here, you're connecting one way or another with members of your biological family. And that's a fascinating story in itself that I'm going to leave for people to discover. What happened when you tried to contact your mother, your her then husband, who was supposedly your father, and the other children that are also in that family. And that's very interesting what happened with that whole bunch. And also how you got yourself to the end of that rehab process. The other thing that is very powerful for me was your initial struggle in finding your South African identity and how you eventually do. To me, look, here you are. You're here in South Africa. You're unmistakably a South African. To me, you're more South African than most people. And I've always thought, well, because I think this, and this is an honest thought, I think that mixed race South Africans are the truest South Africans because they embody what South Africa is, what its history is, how the different people who ended up here. To me, it's like the only possible resolution for this country is to eventually produce its own indigenous people. And that's the people we call the coloured people. So it's like...
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, who's Dahlia Mpofu's son, he's written this fabulous book called Democracy and Delusion. We met at the Open Book Fair in Cape Town recently, and we've kind of got this game going on still, whose book is like topping the non-fiction. And at the moment, or there was a point a couple of weeks ago, when it was Trevor Noah, me and Sizwe, and we've started to call ourselves the Mixed Race Mafia.
Fantastic.
So to have three young-ish, I'm going to say I'm fairly young. I think I'm the oldest of the bunch. But to have three young mixed race South Africans at the top of the non-fiction list, book list.
That's
I
amazing.
love that.
Well, as I said,
and there's going to be more of me running around. The more, this is what's happening now.
It can't be 100% unique, your story. Individually it is.
Yeah.
But there must be more variations on that kind
and
of story.
And there will be more and more.
And that's why I say people need to tell that story so we understand what South Africans are.
Yeah.
So then that leads me finally to this question. So you are a South African. You actually always were a South African.
Yeah.
But there's still, of course, you grew up in England. So now living in this country, is there a part of you that occasionally sees it from the outside and thinks, what the hell?
Yeah. Less so now. When I first got here, and you'll have read about this in the book, my mouth hung open for about 2 years because I couldn't believe what I was seeing and what I was hearing. And obviously I've kind of acclimatized to that. That bothers me sometimes, that things that 10 years ago would have made me go, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. I just pass off as normal everyday South Africa. And I have to check myself on things like that and say, no, remember, this is not the norm. This is not okay.
And I think especially now, because I think South Africa's arrived at a point where we're understanding that we whitewashed too much. We swept things under the carpet too much. And we need to relook at a lot of stuff that we didn't.
For sure.
We need voices like yours, who's an insider who's been an outsider, to help us see that.
It's a very interesting perspective. I was at the Zeitz Museum at the weekend, and there was some beautiful art there. And in fact, it was some art, a series of photographs by an African-American photographer depicting slavery. And an Afrikaans woman behind me said, why can't they just get over apartheid?
It's the other thing that makes me worry and wonder how many people like her are around, because there must be loads of them thinking that.
But that's what's important, that we have these spaces.
Absolutely.
These spaces for
spaces like that
conversations.
and stories like yours. So are we going to get more books from you?
Yes.
Fantastic. This book was extraordinary. And I really urge people to read it. And that we mustn't imagine that because I'm a nice white person from biological parents, that this has nothing to do with me, because it's got more to do with me than anyone. If I need to understand what is South Africa and who are my fellow South Africans. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story with me today, that there's so much more of in this amazing book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sara-Jayne. It's been a great pleasure.
Thanks.
Sara-Jayne is the host of her own show on Cape Talk Radio, 567 Cape Town. And you can join her there from 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. Sundays through Thursdays. We will, of course, be back here next Friday at the usual time. Be sure to like the Facebook page to stay in touch with what's happening, and I will see you again.